Lords of the Black Banner, a Mongolian epic. Fractured Empire, Book 2. Written by Starr Davies. Narrated by David Wiseman. Dedicated to Professor Kyle Fingerson for opening the door to this amazing discovery. Chapter 2. From the Ashes of Former Glory. Ming Ordos Territory, 1468. Bayon kept his head down as he followed one of Isama's scouts through the Ming-Mongol border town. According to Isama, this area of Ordos had little Ming presence. Most of the Ming border guards remained further south, closer to the mountains and their precious wall at Yulin, where food and reinforcements were plentiful. Mongols here lived in relative peace with the nearby Ming, and often sent tributes to the Ming Emperor, Genghis. It made Bayon's stomach churn with disgust that any Mongol would pay tribute to the Ming. Though news of a new Mongol prince had spread far and wide already, few recognized Bayon so far south. To be safe, Bayon dressed down for these covert meetings, so no one might connect him to being the prince. In such a place as this Ordos village, it would be easy to lose one's head to the wrong Mongolian Ming loyalist. The scout leading Bayon turned a corner, peering cautiously across the street before allowing Bayon to step around with him. All the houses in this small village were squat and cramped. How could true Mongols live like this? For a year, Bayon had been slithering along these border tribes with Isama, who always seemed to have the right answer and kind words for the prince, and with Unabulid, who knew one hard truth Bayon would give anything to erase. Bayon spent that time spreading tales of the Borjigin Yuan dynasty's return to power. Mondul had ordered him to plant the seeds of adventure, plunder, and glory for those who were bold enough to whet their appetites on Ming riches. During his first meeting with a rather surly tribal lord, Bayon had spoken Isama in Mondul's carefully crafted speech, full of promises of former glory, but the words didn't ring true even to him. The lord had been less than receptive to the idea of revolting against the Ming. He outright rejected the idea that anyone was coming to help them, and sent Bayon, Isama, and Unabulid on their way. Unabulid had given Bayon another of his knowing glares, a reminder that he simply waited for Bayon to make a fatal error that either would cost him his life or that Mondul could not ignore. Bayon remained unclear whether Unabulid told Mandukhai what he knew of Nergui's death. It hung between them like a balanced knife, waiting to drop. Much to Bayon's relief, Mondul's patience had been seemingly without end, but under Unabulid's vigilance, Bayon could not risk failing. The streets were all cramped and dirty, and the stink of refuse permeated the air. Stools and pots rested beside humble homes. The Mongols here had assimilated themselves into local Ming culture. Bayon wrinkled his nose in disgust. The sooner they could leave this place, the better. Desperate to succeed, Bayon could not let that first meeting fail. He had returned to that obstinate lord and had abandoned Mondul's carefully crafted speech. Instead, Bayon had trusted his own luck, his natural charisma. In Bayon's experience, speaking so formally often came across as fake. They could not stir up trouble along the borders if they didn't inspire passion and glory. By the end of the meeting, that lord had listened intently. Dozens of secret meetings had passed since then, and it emboldened more of the Mongols to prepare for a war against the Ming. But only when the time came, after Bayon raised the black banner of war. The scout guiding him through the cramped streets tonight hissed at Bayon and nodded to the connecting street. Unabulid and Isama waited back at camp for his return. They rarely accompanied him anymore. Bayon peered around the corner and spotted a squat building with a single lamp lit in a window. The construction was rough and reminiscent of Ming culture. Dried mud, rough stones, and wood frames with a thatched roof. Bayon grimaced. Bayon nodded to the scout in understanding, and slipped through the shadows toward their target. He hated slinking along like this. It felt just as false as the words Mondul had given him. Why should he, the Golden Prince, hide in shadows when he could rally the surrounding tribes? Yet both Asama and Unabulid insisted he remain as inconspicuous as possible, and he had learned a hard lesson about deviating from their plans. "These clothes itch my skin," he thought bitterly, as he pressed his back to the wall beside the door and knocked once, quick and soft. Bayon hated commoner wool and longed to don his silk again. The scout edged closer to the door as it opened, putting himself between the prince and the inhabitants, no doubt out of instinct to protect the great Khan's heir. The man who opened the door pressed the tip of his sword to the scout's neck without breaking skin. It impressed Bayon that the scout did not flinch. "I bring Mondul Khan's messenger, as promised," the scout whispered, glancing at the street from the corner of his eye. The older man scowled, glanced at Bayon critically, then lowered his sword and ushered them inside. Bayon didn't have to be told twice. He didn't enjoy hiding in the shadows of the street. The inside of the home was just as cramped as the street outside, nearly a dozen local commanders and lords packed into the small space. A long stone stove rested along one wall, currently cold. Several men sat on the cold stovetop, while others sat on benches around a small lacquer table. Tall bamboo shelves held various metal pots in the corner. A blanket hung over an opening into another room that he could only assume was where the owner of this home slept. How he longed to sleep there, in an actual bed. How he longed to go home. "And I can, as soon as I finish Mondul's mission," he thought. All their eyes fell on him the moment he entered. "He's a child," one man said, not bothering to whisper. "I'm old enough to command a tumen of 10,000, Bayon said sharply. Several men scowled in doubt. Bayon raised himself to his full height, which had grown significantly in the past 2 years. At 18, he stood nearly a head above most men, except Unabulid and a handful of Mondul's guards. As Bayon raised to his full height, many of these men dropped their skeptical scowls. "How long have the Ming suppressed you?" Bayon asked without missing a beat, standing confidently before them with his chest puffed out and chin held high. "How long have they raided your people, killed your sons, abused your women? How long before you stand up to them?" "We do not have enough men to fight back," an elder said. "And when we move goods between tribes to help stave off hunger, the great Khan's Golden Prince raids our caravans. Thanks to this so-called prince, we are losing our goods. How does the Khan propose we fight back with nothing to fill our bellies?" A flicker of doubt crossed Bayon's face, but he swiftly recovered. To his knowledge, none of his men were raiding any Mongol caravans, though he had stopped a Ming caravan and gave the goods to one of the Mongol tribes. "He doesn't care, Ming Tao," another man grumbled. Bayon turned to face the accuser. "I do care, and that's why I'm here. You've heard the rumors," Bayon said. He waited for them to consider their answer and nod. "They are true. Mondul Khan has an heir, and soon he will raise the black banner, call on the tribes to join him, and retake our lands. Lands the Ming stole from us." Men shifted and exchanged uncertain glances. "I won't fight for a thief, even if he calls himself a prince," a young commander said, clenching his fists in his lap. "The prince is no thief," Bayon snapped, unable to control his temper in this hot, humid, and cramped house. How could they doubt him? How could they dare say such things about him? Bayon caught himself holding his breath and forced himself to relax. "But who else would raid our caravans?" another man asked. "Who indeed?" Bayon retorted. His patience wore thin as the stifling air pressed against his chest. He wanted out of this place. The prince did not raid your caravans, nor did any of his men, I can promise you that. Someone is acting against him, trying to stop him because they know if he gains your support, they have lost all power. The scout shifted closer to Bayon's side as one man suddenly stood. And who would do such a thing? The man they called Ming Tao asked. Bayon took pleasure in watching the older man tilt his head back to look up at him. He could think of several answers to that question, but only one made the most logical sense. The Ming Emperor. The men broke into a flurry of protests at this. Most concerning were regarding why the raiders were Mongol bandits. None of this was going as Bayon had expected. Aside from that first meeting, all the rest had gone smoothly. He always stirred up the right words to rally the men against the Ming. This time, the tribesmen seemed to prefer the heavy hand of the Ming Emperor. Their voices rose to a crescendo, and Bayon struggled to even hear himself think over the noise. Soon, they would attract attention of neighbors if it didn't stop. Bayon raised his voice, strong and sure above the din, so that everyone could hear him clearly. You disgrace the Mongol heritage! The words caught their attention like fire, drawing nearly a dozen scowls in his direction. Bayon knew he had to barrel forward before one of these men decided to cut off his head. Were we not once one nation under the rule of the Khan of Khans? Were these not your lands, instead of the emperor's? Our former strength is falling into disrepair, and if we don't unite to restore it, we will be too late. The Ming leave us alone as long as we leave them alone, Ming Tao said. Why unbalanced? A balanced system. They leave you alone because their old emperor is weak. The new one is young and inexperienced, Bayon replied. But once this new young emperor has enough power, he will look to the Mongol nation once more. He will ride to war and chase you from these lands that belong to us, and we will have fallen so far apart that no one will ride out to help. Some men had gone red in the face, and Bayon hoped that anger was not directed at him. He moved one careful, confident step at a time around the packed room. His hands sweat, clasped behind his back as he stepped close enough for any one of these men to draw their swords easily and kill him. If there was one thing he had learned under Mondul's tutelage, it was that men respected power and fearlessness. Even if Bayon didn't feel fearless, he had to make them think he did. The great Khan has not come to our aid in centuries, the young commander said. What do we owe him? Are you Ming or Mongol? Bayon asked. Because when I look around me now, I see Ming homes, Ming farming, Ming clothing. He leaned close to the young commander and swept his hand over the commander's shoulder to punctuate his point. The commander glared at him, but clamped his jaw shut. Satisfied, Bayon turned to the older men in the group. Some of you rode with Malan Khan. A few of you may have even ridden beside Mondul Khan when he avenged the deaths of the Borjigin princes. Are your memories so short? He scoffed at them and resumed his casual walk around the packed room. The time to unite is now, he said, staring down every man as he passed. The time to fight back, for what belongs to us is coming. We will strike like a viper at the Ming court before they gather their full forces against us. We will gorge ourselves on their riches and women. We will restore the Mongol Empire that once belonged to Genghis, Ogedai, and Kublai. We will no longer bow to this emperor. Bayon observed as some men shifted and sat straighter. Others nodded in agreement, They were on the hook. Now, he just had to pull them in. "We Mongols were not created to sit in homes and farm the land," Bayon continued. "We were born in the saddle, bow in our hand. We were reared with a thirst for adventure and a restless spirit. We grew stronger together as we plundered the world and took what was rightfully ours. Everything under the blue sky is mine. It is yours. It is ours." A few of the men voiced cheers of agreement. Bayon stopped beside the stove and stared at the earthen door. After a moment of consideration, he placed his palm on the handle, tested the heat, then pulled it open once he was satisfied that it was cold. "This is what they have done to us," he said, waving his hand toward the open stove piled with ash. "They have locked us into our spaces, turned us against each other, and reduced our power to ash." He plunged his hand inside and prayed the ash wouldn't burn his hands, then seized a fistful and held it up high for everyone to see. Holding the warm ash in his fist heated his already hot skin, but he could show no sign of pain or weakness in front of these men. "But has our fire gone out?" Gradually, each man shook his head or voiced an emphatic no. "Then let us unite and rekindle the ashes of our former glory." Bayon tipped his fist and let the ashes drift to the floor. "Help us reduce this emperor's power to ash and extinguish his flame once and for all." He turned in place, meeting all the eager, angry eyes staring back at him. "Throw off the chains Emperor Genghis has yoked you with, and show his guards the true power of the Mongols."
"And why should we listen to you, a simple messenger from the great Khan?"
Ming Tao asked. "Because," Bayon swallowed, knowing he could end up dead, speaking these words if the men present decided not to heed his call. "I am Bolku Jinong, nephew of Mondul Khan and your future Khan." Unabulid had packed light when he left on this mission with Bayon and Asama. He only brought what he could strap to his horse, and he shared a ger with a few of his commanders. But Unabulid was a hard man, used to sleeping on the ground under the open sky or riding in his saddle for days. When desperation struck, he could sleep while riding. His men were much the same, all seasoned fighters, ready to ride at a moment's notice or sleep in the open when necessary. They required very little. Isama, on the other hand, had a cart packed with materials to build a ger wherever they stopped, as well as a wealth of food and other supplies he deemed necessary. Unabulid despised Isama, the great Khan's new vice-chancellor. He was too confident, too certain, too calm. Everything he did had a distinct purpose, and often Unabulid struggled to decipher what the weaker man was up to, which only made Unabulid mistrust him even more. A confident and calm Uyghur was as dangerous as a scorpion in the Gobi. Isama's presence was unsettling, but Mondul had grown to trust the man in the past year, and despite how much Unabulid despised Isama, the man's tactics had been grudgingly brilliant, and at nearly 8 years younger than Unabulid. He hated to give the man too much credit, but Isama knew what was going on before anyone else even caught a slight whiff of it. Unabulid respected the intelligence, but hated the man. This entire mission had been Isama's idea. Bayon had wanted to charge his men in and liberate their subjugated Mongols, but the first attempt to stir up doubt among the border tribes toward the Ming, almost a year ago, proved to be near catastrophic. Bayon had ignored both Unabulid and Isama when they had advised moving with caution to avoid raising alarms. The moment the local tribe near the city of Kokegota had heard the Golden Prince had arrived, They rallied their forces and charged against the Great Khan's men, assuming it was an invasion, proving that some of the southern Mongols were more loyal to the Ming than their own Khan. Thankfully, Unabulid and Asama's scouts had received warning in time to prevent disaster. Once the local commander had been talked down, Asama arranged for a meeting on neutral ground, the first of dozens of such meetings. Unabulid checked the saddle straps to ensure everything was secured. Bayon would be back from tonight's secret meeting soon, and he wouldn't be happy with the news. If Unabulid could find any satisfaction from slowly torturing Bayon, this news would drive an arrow through the boy. He almost smiled at the thought of the dumb look Bayon would surely adopt. "What do you suppose our young lord will say when he finds out we are leaving him?" Asama asked as he stepped up beside Unabulid, guiding his own horse. Unabulid glanced at Asama's smug face.
"Why is he always so smug?"
and shrugged.
"It doesn't matter what he says. When the Great Khan calls us back, we go back. The prince's word is not superior to our Khan."
Asama stroked his mount's nose and nodded. "True, yet our prince always has an opinion about everything."
"Let us hope he is wise enough by now to hold his tongue and hold the line."
A wave of cheering voices rose like a tide washing over the two of them. Only one thing would cause such a response. Asama smirked.
"I suppose we're about to find out."
Bayon galloped toward them, stopping his chestnut mare hard enough to kick up dirt in the air. Unabulid waved it away with a scowl.
"Always the showman,"
Unabulid thought bitterly. Bayon turned his mount to look over the carts and mounted men. "Are we going somewhere?"
"We are,"
Unabulid corrected, nodding toward Asama to indicate just the two of them. Asama shot a glare in Unabulid's direction and said,
"We have received a message from Mondul Khan while you were away. He summons Urlak Unabulid and I back to Monkey Bulag."
Bayon looked just for a moment like a wounded animal. "But not me." A flash of satisfaction surged through Unabulid. Bayon was a boy seeking his father's respect. Unabulid shrugged.
"He has his reasons, but he says we are to hurry back. You are to stay and continue this mission."
"Nothing is more important than you completing this mission," Asama agreed. Unabulid hated when Asama agreed with him. Bayon dismounted. "You leave now?"
"That's what hurry back means,"
Unabulid said tersely. Bayon shot him a treacherous glare. Unabulid knew that should the Khan die, Bayon would likely try to have him killed. The prince had no love for him.
"Maybe Bayon doesn't care for me because I don't fall prey to his silver tongue,"
Unabulid considered with amusement. Or maybe because Unabulid knew Bayon's secret. Neither Unabulid nor Mandukhai had indicated that Unabulid had told her the truth about Bayon killing Nergui 3 years ago. The why of the murder remained a mystery, though. Bayon constantly squirmed around Unabulid, as if afraid Unabulid would share his knowledge with everyone should Bayon step out of line. Unabulid took great delight in seeing the pitiful whelp kowtowing for silence. Unabulid had told Mandukhai the truth as soon as she was up to visitors after the miscarriage. She had taken the information with an air of grace and dispassion that made him wonder if she blamed Unabulid for not finding the killer of their child as well. Not that she would ever say as much, but Unabulid felt the failure all the same. Between that failure and Togachi's sharp warning when he learned the truth, a chasm had grown between himself and Mandukhai. Asama bowed to Bayon.
"I'm afraid we must leave tonight, but we leave you with 5,000 of the men to command and finish your task."
He held out his hand, and Unabulid observed as Asama and Bayon shook, like old friends.
You've done well, Bokujinong. I am honored to have been on this journey with you. I look forward to finishing it together.
Unabulid felt a twist of disgust. Asama ingratiated himself with both Mondul and Bayon at every opportunity. A despicable act. Unabulid turned away from the two and mounted his mare.
Keep the scouts out riding in search of Ming patrols, he commanded. When the Emperor hears what you are up to, he will come.
Bayon grinned like a boy far too eager to see battle, with no real understanding of what that would mean. Let him come. Asama shook his head and chuckled as he mounted his horse. Within the hour, Unabulid and Asama left the Golden Prince in the fields of the Ordos Plateau. 5,000 men followed them north to their homelands. Like most of the men ready to go back home and see their wives, Unabulid was eager to return and see Mandukhai. It had been far too long, and he missed her fiery temper and spirit. He looked forward to seeing her, and feared their inevitable encounter.
If you enjoyed this sample, click the links in the description to hear more. Do you want free audiobooks, ebooks, or autographed paperbacks? Join me on Patreon at patreon.com/szdavies_character-assassin. You'll gain access to my Discord server, behind-the-scenes updates, merch, and so much more.